Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sales Enablement Live. My name is Felix Krüger, and I'm really excited about this one. SE Live, it's your weekly dose of German accents, and for some, your weekly dose of the latest Sales Enablement insights. And I am dialing in live here from sunny Sydney. It's 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. So told me Google anyway. But I just wanted to briefly touch on last week's episode. We had a few technical issues, so sorry about that. It's lucky that we're not saving lives here. But if you want to catch up on last week's session, please make sure to check out the State of Sales Enablement podcast, where we always republish the recordings of these sessions. Last week, we, as always, we were discussing the latest podcast episode, sales enablement news, and the Q&A. So if you want to take a listen, please do so on the State of Sales Enablement podcast. And like this week, we are all about social media and social selling. Simply because we had Anna Rokina on the podcast with a great interview. So for those of you who are not familiar, Anna Rokina is one of the leading social selling experts previously in the APAC region, but she just last week relocated to Georgia. Not Georgia in the US, but the country Georgia, out of all places, which is as far as I was told, a beautiful place with a really high quality of living. Anna is originally from Russia, so that might explain the proximity. But she just recently relocated, and we were lucky enough to get hold of her before she did so to really talk about some of the key insights around social selling and what is needed to make social selling a success in 2022 in B2B sales. And for those of you who have not been able to catch the full interview, I highly recommend listening to it. But for those of you who just want to have the key insights, I just briefly want to share with you some of the key points that she has shared. And for those of you who are not familiar with Anna, she is really she really follows a no nonsense approach, which is something that I really appreciate about her. And she just really tells it how it is, and is also able to share real world insights because she has led social selling programs for Oracle and Lenovo and a few other large enterprise clients of hers in the APAC region. So it's not one of those gurus that you find on LinkedIn. It's actually somebody who's really been there, done that, and is actually able to share what works and what doesn't without being jaded by any agenda. So really awesome to listen to her insights. And let's take a listen to the first item that we have here. It's the first insight that she shared on the show, which was about content on social media and how to go about sourcing that as a sales team. So, just give me a second. I'm just trying to work out the tech here. All right, here we go.
And content ecosystem.
Oops. Just bear with me for a second. It's the technology as always. Here we go. And content ecosystem. Content All right. So I absolutely loved that comment that she made. The people who created the buyer persona, it's a really funny one because it's obviously marketing. So there's a lot of criticism always that marketing departments aren't close enough to the customer for being able to share those sort of insights. And the sort of dynamic that you typically deal with within organizations when it comes to content creation is that marketing is the key the key team with those capabilities that would then supply sales with content to then use on social media and for social selling activity. And I think something to consider here is that what Anna says about subject matter experts being involved in creating content, I think that really comes down to buyer acumen and subject matter expertise. Of course, you need to be able to talk about the solution on offer with authority, but from my point of view, subject matter expertise these days in the sales context is more and more about buyer acumen and buyer expertise. And I think there's a big opportunity, as always, for sales to upskill on that front. But also, if you think about content production, I think it is really worthwhile for marketing to make an active effort to be closer to the buyers, to be able to support sales on that front. And there's a lot of marketing thought leaders like Chris Walker out there that really advocate for being closer to the customer and actually spending time with the customer to understand their pain points, their day-to-day, how they operate in their jobs, and how the solution on offer really feeds into solving those issues that customers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think that is true for marketing when it comes to the content creation, but I think that's also particularly true for sales, as always. And that's something that I see in my work with clients in my company, Fast Forward. When we talk to sales, that's still something that we see that we see lacking in terms of buyer acumen, meaning that there's often not the knowledge there that really allows sales to not only create content for social media, but also to then utilize content that might be created by the marketing department to then continue the conversation with buyers with authority. So I think it's lacking everywhere. And considering how many bad salespeople are out there on social media and how many really transactional sellers that have no idea about the real pain points of the buyers are out there utilizing platforms like LinkedIn or engage in forums that are relevant to buyers. I think there's a really big opportunity for sales to upskill on that front and not only be close to buyers in terms of the way they interact with them and the way they communicate or the communication frequency, but there's an opportunity to develop true buyer acumen, which considers trends, best practices, benchmarks. And I think that's a real big frontier ahead for a lot of B2B sales organizations to scale the approach to teaching buyer acumen across the organization and to really capitalize on those small centers of excellence that you might have, or those pockets of excellence that you might have within the sales team, to really let the whole organization benefit from from that buyer exposure. So I think there's real truth in what Anna said here in her comment around content creation. It is really crucial to include those subject matter experts in creating content, but it's equally as important to transfer that knowledge and that subject matter expertise when it comes to buyers to the broader sales team. Yeah. Now, the next comment that she made was around digital fluency and what it really means for sellers in 2022. And let's take a listen what she said on that front.
There's more independence, there's more flexibility. I think more authority to create your own content as well. So the new skill set is not just digital fluency in terms of how well you know the platforms and tools, but how do you network online? How open you are to starting conversations, to making connections with people you will probably never meet offline.
All right, so this is an interesting one, and something that I can certainly confirm from my experience is that the flexibility has certainly increased. You still see some social media profiles from not only sellers but from all kinds of people using their social media profiles in a business context that states the views are my own. I think that's still a legacy statement from the time where there wasn't that flexibility and people weren't really allowed to use social media in a business context by their employers, just because companies didn't really have that understanding of like the power of it being used, and haven't had really the policies in place to inform people on how to use it responsibly without damaging the company. So I think there's a lot more flexibility on that front, and I think the knowledge of platform and the usage of platform is also something that is a baseline that is pretty much has become normal. So everybody kind of knows how LinkedIn works. Some people know what best practice looks like, but I think the ultimate capability these days in terms of social selling, as Anna said, is to really shift your mindset in the way you use social media, and really be open to utilizing social channels as a way to build relationships with people that you might never meet in person. And I think that's a mind shift that I certainly see in market that hasn't happened on a in a in a mainstream way. So I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, and again, a lot of opportunity for sales team to actually adopt that mindset. If you look at the stats on LinkedIn, and there's also a lot of surveys in terms of how people use social platforms, there's still a lot of lurkers, as Anna called them. So there's people just lurking and consuming content without engaging in any shape or form in visible ways. They don't like content, they don't comment on content, they don't share content, so they're just consuming it. And I get that all the time. I publish a lot of content on LinkedIn, and there are a lot of people that tell me later on in conversations people that I know personally, oh yeah, I saw this one post of yours, I really liked it, but I had no indication whatsoever that they had really engaged with it. So I think this is probably also where a lot of companies come from that are not convinced in terms of social selling, and that really see social selling as a fad. They don't see immediate results, so they think it's a waste of time. But what I certainly see is also in sales conversations that I lead is that the buyers that I speak to, or the prospects that I speak to, they engage with my content, and they see my content and they consume my content without them actually actively engaging. And they tell me in conversations after the fact that they have seen a certain content piece that I really liked, and that's certainly proved to me that there's still an effect being created, even though the engagement might not be obvious. And I think the sort of reach that you generate on social media, which is indicated, by the post stats that you're able to see as the person posting, really indicates the power that comes with social media content if you distribute it effectively and consistently. So I think awesome episode by interview with Anna Rokina. So again, I would highly recommend you tuning in if you are interested in learning more about social selling and potentially continue the conversation with Anna. She puts a lot of great content out there. She actually, I don't know if that's still the case, but she used to have her own weekly live stream as well in the Trust Enablement community. So if you're part of that, might be worth connecting there as well. to see if she will do one of those streams in the future. I've certainly learned a lot from her, and I think it's highly relevant these days if you consider the opportunity that's out there. Now, next segment is our news segment, and there's a few news items that I want to touch on. News item number one is the big news around the Facebook shares and the Meta, which is the holding company that owns Facebook. And I read that news snippet out for you here. It reads, Facebook shares have dropped by 26% after weaker than expected result, according to CNBC. Shares of Facebook parent Meta closed down more than 26% Thursday after the company forecasted weaker than expected revenue growth in the next quarter. It is also said it's taking a big hit from Apple's privacy changes and showed the first quarterly decline in daily active users on record. The stock finished with its biggest one-day drop ever, ahead of the 19% plummet it saw in July 2018. Thursday's drop shaved more than $230 billion from its market cap, bringing it to about $660 billion. So if you hear all those numbers, it's really hard to feel sorry for Facebook. And the reason I picked this news story is for a couple of reasons. So number one is I used to be a sales enabler in the media space. So I used to work for an Australian media company called Fairfax Media, which was essentially and still is. It's the publications by Fairfax Media are actually now owned by a different media company called Nine. But when I was at Fairfax, and we were competing with Facebook and also Google, and those companies, those big tech companies, were taking a really big share of our revenue, and we were selling essentially audiences. Like that's what we had in common. Fairfax Media more in an editorial environment, like news websites, and Facebook and Google are more focused on audience data and essentially aggregating audience data and selling advertising on that basis. Google and Facebook, for those who are not familiar, they these days own about 80% of the advertising market, and the remaining 20% is reserved for traditional news publishers. So on that front, I think it's a quite interesting story because it really changes the dynamic on a sales from a sales perspective in that advertising market. So there's still a lot of people that I know in the Australian market that work in sales roles in that space, and I'm sure those people will be all over that news and will take that as an opportunity to really push on the sales front in selling to media agencies. And I think the second part of that announcement that is quite interesting is, and it's always interesting from a sales perspective because, as you know, CEOs are the ultimate salespeople when it comes to their company's stock if they are listed on a stock exchange. And I think it's quite interesting what we saw recently from Mark Zuckerberg. He was selling the vision of Facebook entering the metaverse, as he calls it. So it's essentially a second life on the internet, which is all about virtual and augmented reality. And a lot of people weren't quite sure about that because the picture that he painted seemed to be very far away, very futuristic, and B, the applications weren't really that relevant. I heard a lot of people in the sales space talk about that announcement as well, just simply because they wanted to stay up to date with the sort of digital channels that you would expect in the future to become more and more relevant to buyers as well. I don't think we'll see sales meetings taking place in the metaverse anytime soon, but a lot of people were skeptical of that sort of announcement, and then the recent plunge in the stock prices were then a continuation of that skepticism around Mark Zuckerberg's sales pitch. So I think it always fascinates me, how CEOs and how companies pitch their strategic vision to the stock market, and what then actually happens, how the stock market reacts on the basis of the company then being able to deliver on that vision. So again, I think that's on a larger scale what happens in B2B sales on a regular basis. Customers gain confidence based on the quality of the pitch being delivered, and then you see then sustainable revenue being generated based on whether or not you're able to then deliver on that vision. So I think it's always fascinating to watch the stock markets and how CEOs actually create their pitches. And this was certainly a prominent example from last week. Now, the other example or the other announcement that I also wanted to share was that sales tech platform Scratchpad has closed a Series B funding round. So the announcement reads on TechCrunch, Scratchpad nabs $33 million Series B to continue building sales workspace. Scratchpad, a startup that is building a tool to make it easier for salespeople to enter data into Salesforce, has expanded that mission to give access to the information it's collecting to the whole revenue team. Apparently, investors were pleased with that expanded approach, and the company announced a $33 million Series B today. So there was actually an announcement from a couple of weeks ago. I just think it's very interesting to see those sort of Series A and Series B funding announcements being made in the sales tech space, just simply because the numbers are getting really ginormous these days, which is a reflection of really the hype being created in sales tech. But it's also a reflection of the confidence that investors have in sales tech gaining more traction. And certainly the conversations that I had recently in market with clients and potential clients really shows that there's a real heavy focus on investment in sales tech. So the hype continues, and Scratchpad, which seems to be solving two big problems, which is entering data into Salesforce, which is a problem that exists as long as Salesforce exists, as far as I'm aware. And the second problem being data sharing across the revenue team, which also becomes more and more relevant with sales enablement gaining more traction, and all parts of the go-to-market team essentially being able to benefit from Salesforce data. So I think, I'm not particularly familiar with Scratchpad, but it's certainly something to look out for. And somebody just mentioned there is a technical issues. Okay. I'm not sure if anybody else has the same issue. If you do, I apologize. It would just be another technical issue that we recently had. As long as you can hear me, all right. I hope you are still able to listen. But yeah, so the other piece of news or an article that was also published on TechCrunch, which I also found quite interesting, was about sales kickoffs and how to organize and execute an effective hybrid sales kickoff event in 2022. And the reason I found this announcement quite interesting was that they actually shared some research data, and what they're saying here is that about 27% expressed interest in attending events in person only. About 34% prefer to attend virtually, and 39% wanted to participate in hybrid events with both in person and virtual components. And I think in terms of sales kickoffs, that's a hot topic. There's been a lot of discussion around that recently in the sales enablement space. And I think if you consider the numbers here in terms of the interest in attending in-person events, attending virtually, and 39% wanting to participate in hybrid events, I think that really shows the flexibility and the fragmentation that you're seeing these days in terms of content consumption and engagement with those sort of events online. Recently, there was an interesting conversation on LinkedIn around the topic of webinars, and there were a lot of people that were saying they only register for webinars to consume them on demand. And I think that's really a reflection of people just having a lower tolerance in terms of certain experiences online being imposed on them. So I think that sort of thinking also needs to be applied not only to sales conversations, but also if you're a sales leader or a sales enabler, and that sort of thinking about multi-channel content consumption and engagement of the sales team should really be food for thought in terms of how leadership is approached, but also how those sort of sales kickoff events are being structured, which is obviously always a big milestone within the year for sales teams. And I think there's a lot of platforms that sort of try to solve that, create engaging online versions of sales kickoffs, but I don't see anybody who has 100% nailed that and really cracked that formula that really works for all companies and all sales reps out there. All right, so just to finish off, I also wanted to share a couple of thoughts on consistency in sales on social media as well. So there was a random conversation that we had about consistency in sales on LinkedIn. So James Fielding, a contact of mine on LinkedIn, he's the head of Sales Enablement for Grant Thornton here in Australia. I was actually talking about how he gave away all his business shirts because he's only working from home now, and that led into a conversations around consistency in sales, because also have to make sure that you update your profile picture so the person in the meeting doesn't give a completely different vibe to what you were expecting, and social profiles and so on. And I think there's a lot of truth in it, and if you consider relationships being really integral to sales, and relationships being built on trust, I think consistency is really key to building that trust. And especially if we talk about social sales and salespeople approaching potential buyers online. At the end of the day, salespeople are only strangers, in that context, unless there has been a deeper engagement along the way. And I think it's really key to be consistent in your presence online as a salesperson to be able to build that trust. And it's really an opportunity for salespeople to project what the brand is all about onto social media, and then guide potential buyers into avenues that allow for deeper engagement, from social media to things like webinars or workshops, to then Zoom calls and more in-depth conversations. So I think creating that consistency early on in the conversation on social media, just to feed into the social theme of this episode, is really key to building the foundation for robust relationships. So I want to leave you with that thought. Again, if you're interested in talking about any of the topics that I touched on today in more detail, please connect with me on LinkedIn, Felix Krüger. And I also would like to encourage you to subscribe to the State of Sales Enablement podcast if you haven't already. Thank you so much for joining, as always. We'll be again live next week, and I will speak to you soon. Bye-bye.